Okay, guys, let's get started. Sorry for the delay. My computer is dying. I hope that it doesn't die in the next 45 minutes. Yeah. But let's see. Hopefully, it's all fine. Today, I want to talk to you about broken windows. Broken windows. What are broken windows, and how do they come about? And actually, how do we study it? It's originally a lecture that I wanted to do before the break, so actually it fits a little bit before one starts the whole segregation thing, but I had switched that around because Roland was taking over one of the lectures, so it shouldn't be a problem here anyway. But we're taking a slight step back because broken windows, it's about the spread of disorder, about how crime spreads, how crime is contagious. So when you go back and think about where we talked about social influence. So basically, this is an application of this, and then and then you move on to the next step. And actually, I'm going to combine it a little bit here too, because I'm also in the second part. I'm going to look at macro level outcomes of this. So, what is the result at the macro level? And again, we are sort of like have the features of this lecture. We think about the micro level dynamics and the macro level outcomes. Yeah. And last time we had this surprising result. Where I showed you that I can produce segregation in the world even when individuals are very tolerant. Individuals want to live in an integrated world, but segregation where people live apart from each other, according to race, according to, gender, according to age or whatnot, is sort of like an unintended consequence of that. Yeah, and that's very fascinating. Once you kind of start to think about that, it's very fascinating because then you look at the social world in slightly different ways. Because then you immediately come into play and people ask you, so what are you doing as a sociologist? Then you can say, this is what I'm doing. And this is what you're not doing. When you are doing psychology or business or economics or whatnot, those folks don't look at these jumping from or going from the micro to the macro level and looking at how these things are related with each other. So I think the real value added of a sociologist is to tease that out and to kind of, with this understanding that what we observe at the macro level is not necessarily driven by equally individually racist or intolerant behavior. And that's sort of like very, very fascinating. And when you ask me about, I went through these phases for sure as well, where I thought, what the hell is this sociology all about? What's the point of it? It's completely natural. I had sort of like this crisis just before I started my PhD. Actually, even for my PhD, I had suggested a very traditional sociological topic where I was about to start doing a PhD on social stratification, about social inequalities, higher and lower classes, and how that is in the society. And I wanted to look at eating and drinking behavior. Well, my friends thought, that's actually pretty cool. You can sit in a pub and you can observe people, how they drink pints, and it's actually research. Actually it was. But nevertheless, I was very unsatisfied with the whole idea of I was deeply unsatisfied with this idea of taking something very broad, like social class, to explain something very specific, like which kind of drinks people have. I thought other disciplines are better in that. Other disciplines are better in explaining individual behavior. So I wondered, what's the point of sociology then? If others are better at explaining behavior, and I just use a more crude way, a more crude measure like social class, where others, let's say psychologists, have much better ideas about what is driving individual behavior. So I was quite frustrated with that for a while. Luckily, it had happened to me at the beginning of my PhD, so I still had time to change things. And luckily, the university had already accepted me, so they couldn't dump me anymore. They had accepted me on the premise that I would do this stratification research. And this very traditional place where people used to do this kind of stratification and social mobility research for the last 70 years. It was really the center in Europe for this kind of research. It's Nuffield College in Oxford. And but then I started, hey, screw you guys, I'm going to do something completely different. I'm really fascinated by these macro behaviors or macro outcomes that come through micro level dynamics. And that's sort of, I think it's a very fascinating thing to separate these things out with each other. And I think this is sort of, if somebody asks you, what do you add? What do you add as a sociologist? and because sometimes you have these annoying conversations where somebody tells you something that you already know anyway, yeah? Like, well, yeah, there's inequality in society and so on. Okay, do I need to study this? Do I need to study this for 4 years? You need to spend a lot of money on this to say something that somebody else can equally say. I say, this is the kind of stuff that those people can't say. You know, like separating the macro level from the micro level and understanding how these two might be linked with each other in ways that are not as straightforward. Yeah. And then it comes down to the interactions, because that was what is driving the whole thing. It's about dependencies between individuals, the one influencing the other, and so on. And this is where next time, I think on Friday, we're picking this up when we talk about networks. But let me talk about broken windows today. So broken windows, I'll talk a little bit about crime, and probably I push ahead with that. I'm just blabbering away right now. But then I want to talk to you about broken windows and present some experiments in that context. Some might be familiar to you if you've been to my lecture last year. And then I will talk about actually an ongoing research project right now where I'm taking that idea of contagiousness of crime and we look at the macro level outcomes of it. So that's an application of analytic sociology. It's a paper that we're currently preparing. Anyway, so let's talk about crime. So actually it's big puzzle sometimes, you know, or it's a big research field in criminology. It's fascinating stuff. Try to understand crime or look at criminal networks and so on. But social influence can matter a great deal here. Yeah? And so that's one element we already talked about. Another element that matters a great deal here are what we call tipping points. Yeah? Remember, that sort of was this idea that something sort of doesn't change, but if a certain amount of people do something, bang, then the whole thing flips and then we move from nobody stands up to everybody stands up. Yeah? Or, I don't know, from nobody joining a riot to everybody joining a riot. It's like a tipping point where something suddenly shifts. Yeah? It's not like a linear relationship, but it might be a non-linear relationship. And believe it or not, actually people observed tipping points in crime. And it was actually very confusing to people, because what happened was that in the 1990s, crime rates dropped dramatically. There you see now, you see a graph from New York City or the United States in general. You see how much crimes there was, crimes per 1,000 residents. And the key basically is that from the 1990s onwards, crime really dropped down. If you look at it, it almost more than halved in New York City within a few years. It's a big puzzle. Yeah? A lot of people took the credit for it, but nobody really knows why it happened. For criminologists, it's one of the biggest puzzles that they are studying. And so suddenly crime disappeared. What had happened? Well, the one suggestion is that the police actually implemented a zero-tolerance policing strategy. Yeah? Like they were really hard. They were really cracking down on even the simplest infractions, petty crime. You put graffiti at the wall, you were being sent to prison. Yeah? So very, very harsh. What is the idea behind that? Well, actually, there's a reasoning behind that. There's a theoretical reasoning behind that, and that's broken windows theory. So here the idea, and this sort of now nicely leads me over to broken windows theory. Broken windows theory is this simple idea. Actually, it is a name that it's called like that in the literature, so I'm not making this up. It's called broken windows theory. But the idea behind really is a broken window. If you walk by and you see a house with a broken window, you're more likely to throw in another window than if you would walk by and this house wouldn't have already some broken windows to begin with. So the idea is that when you see that obviously nobody cares about this place, why should you care about it? Yeah? If this place here looks fucked up, yeah, there's stuff lying at the floor, there's rubbish and so on, why should you clean up your stuff? So there the idea is that once you kind of see norms or rules already being broken, you're more likely to break norms and rules as well. Yeah? So if you see other people who already, if you see already some broken windows, you're more likely to throw in a window as well. And maybe you observe these kind of things when with graffiti you see it. Sometimes, there's a clean wall. I don't know. There's a, where was it, at one of my last universities in Germany, which was a little more fucked up than this place. And there, you go to the public toilets, and suddenly it's all clean. At some point, graffiti emerges, and then bang, it goes very quickly, and then the whole wall is full with graffiti at some point. So what is the reasoning there? Well, you go in there and you see somebody already put some graffiti on it, so the wall is already ruined. So who cares? So I can as well put some graffiti on it as well and give my sense on it, and whatever people wrote down there or drew there. So that's broken window theory in a nutshell. And it goes back to some psychologists, but it's highly relevant for us and what's relevant for sociologists. To Wilson and Kelling, they suggested that signs of disorder like broken windows, litter, and graffiti induce other types of disorder and petty crime. And then, there you actually see how our research can have a big impact potentially, because based on this thinking, based on this theorizing, and as I will show you in a second, based on empirical evidence, people then introduce this zero tolerance strategy, because then the idea is, of course, I don't know, who cares if there's one person who puts graffiti on the wall being sent to prison. The hard stuff is people selling drugs or the real difficult crimes and so on. How would graffiti make a difference here, right? But this is now a link where actually where it's being suggested that changing these small little things can interrupt those chains, where then ultimately you have some more bigger crimes that would happen. So you can prevent them before they even happen. And so this sort of broken window theory, in a nutshell, the one on the left leads to the one on the right. If you drop something down, if I take this and I brought this rubbish, I don't have a rubbish bin here, but if I do this here now, and now next time you come in here, somebody walks in, oh, there's rubbish lying around. So why should I clean up my rubbish? I'm going to pick that up later on, by the way. So this leads to that. I have a little video that I want to watch with you on broken window theory that applies this kind of thinking or explains it a little more and adds a few other things that we already talked about, like the tipping points and so on, in the context of crime in New York. So let's watch this video together.
3 days before Christmas, 1984, Bernie Getz boarded the number 2 train in Manhattan and sat down next to 4 young African Americans. When the teenagers tried to hustle him for money, something inside Getz snapped. He pulled out a Smith & Wesson .38 and opened fire, shooting down all 4 men. Bernie Getz personified the community of fear that was New York in the 1980s. Politicians had tried reform after reform to stem the flow of crime through the streets of New York, but nothing was working. Street conditions indicated that anything was possible for criminals. Surrounded by unpunished crime, Getz felt justified taking on the vigilante mantle. In the process, he became a criminal himself. But everything changed in New York when 2 revolutionary thinkers arrived on the scene, David Gunn and William Bratton. In the late 80s and early 90s, they adopted a new approach to crime, cracking down on misdemeanors like vandalism and fair beating in the subway system. They scrubbed trains for graffiti, repainted them, and maintained a zero tolerance policy for other small crimes. If you peed in the street, said Bratton, you were going to jail. Why adopt harsh measures towards small crimes when serious criminal activity was a deeper issue? Because sometimes the smallest things can act as a tipping point for something massive. By suffocating minor crime, Bratton and Gunn were experimenting with the idea by criminologists James Wilson and George Kelly, called broken windows theory. Broken windows theory says that perception of disorder in the community plays a huge role in the spread of crime. One broken window signals to a community that no one cares. So what's to keep people from breaking another? This is the sort of neighborhood where you can get away with crime. When no one cares about little things, bigger things happen. Crime grows and spreads like an infection. Consider yawning. Have you noticed how when one person yawns in the room, everyone feels sleepy? A yawn can act as an idea planted in your brain by someone else's action. Crime can be like a yawn. It's contagious. The smallest trigger can set someone off. Like Bernie Getz. In New York in the 80s, Getz was surrounded by crime and disorder. Crossed one too many times on a dirty subway in a neighborhood where no one cared. He pulled the trigger. But it was just around that time that Grund and others began to take broken windows seriously. In 1990, New York had recorded 2,605 homicides. Over the next 5 years, under strict cleanup policies, crime rates plummeted. By 1997, the number of homicides was cut in half. The theory seems to work, but of course, disorder isn't the sole cause of crime. And community cleanup isn't the full solution either. There are 100 factors. Sometimes the issue of crime seems insurmountable, but broken windows theory says that if we just tackle the details, the landscape of crime might tip. We can fix broken windows and take ownership of the dark corners of our neighborhoods. We've always been told to pick up trash to keep our community beautiful, but perhaps if we pick up trash, we can help make our community safe too.
Okay, so I think it's a really nice video, so I couldn't explain it better. That's why I'm showing it, it just also visualizes it nicely. But it's a very powerful idea, that with something very small, we can actually have big impacts. Because sometimes you think, okay, how can a single individual make a difference? Here now, actually, I'm showing you that we actually can. If we buy into that idea, and a lot of research shows that that is the case, that things depend on each other, that people get influenced by others, and that when you kind of see others behaving in a certain way, you are more or less likely to behave in a certain way as well. So this is sort of now a way where you could actually use it to change something big as crime rate. So now the macro level outcome would be how much crime is there. There's you can calculate the crime rate and so on, and you would have interdependencies between individuals. So, but how do we actually know that this is the case? As I said, and even in the video, they said there are tons of other reasons. That people have brought forward, and for the first decade of this, or actually, ever since the 1990s, criminologists came up with all sorts of ideas to make sense out of why suddenly there was such a huge decline in crime. It really caught criminologists a little off guard that suddenly there are fewer criminals. Where did all the criminals go? There are a bunch of other popular science explanations. Maybe you remember the book Freakonomics. Has anybody read Freakonomics? It's a fascinating book. If you like this kind of stuff, you would like the book Freakonomics. It's written by an economist, but the guy looks at everyday life experiences. So his explanation of the drop of the crime rate was, basically he's saying this is the aftermath of the introduction of the birth control pill in the 1970s or in the 1960s. So his argument is that the introduction of the birth control pill led to people having fewer unwanted pregnancies, and he also shows that a lot of criminals tended to come out of unwanted pregnancies. It's quite a controversial argument, but it is like a very new kind of thinking to approach that. But nevertheless, broken window theory is very powerful. But how do we actually test it? How can we say? Because everybody could come up with something like this. Everybody could say, okay, this is sort of what is driving it, but I only buy it, and this is sort of where we are systematic about it, and where you need to be systematic about it when you hear something like this. You have to ask, what is the evidence? How can you prove that this mechanism is actually at play? And what is the mechanism at play here? Well, it suggested that it's social influence. Crime is contagious. Okay, let's test this. So now I'm going to talk to you about a couple of experiments where people did exactly that. So they tried to look at, does disorder spread? Is crime, or in this case it's petty crime, or like norm violations, are they contagious? So basically, these studies they conducted in the beautiful city of Groningen in the Netherlands. If you haven't been there, it's a very cute university city. It's a little far off in the Netherlands, but everything in the Netherlands is close by anyway because the country is not that big to begin with. But nevertheless, it's a very cute little city, and I've been there last semester actually, giving their talk, and this is where those folks, Kaiser, Lindenberg, and Steak, they conducted a whole series of experiments in the social sciences, and they looked at if disorder spreads. And the paper was actually published in Science. So these are social scientists, these are sociologists, folks like me, and they end up publishing in Science with this very cool set of experiments. So I'm going to talk about 4 different kinds of experiments that they did in the paper, and actually it is of the required reading. I think it's on the required reading list, so it's highly relevant for you guys for the exam as well. In the paper they have 6 experiments, but I'm only going to talk about 4 of them. So their research question was the following. Does giving cues that one norm is broken, and that's what they call the contextual norm, does that lead to other norms being broken, which is what they call the target norm? So basically you see one thing that you shouldn't do, you see people do it, they break a norm. Does that lead to you breaking yet something else? That's the idea. Does disorder spread? Does kind of dropping one thing, while in fact there's a sign that you shouldn't drop it, does it lead to you breaking other norms as well? Okay, so let me talk about the first experiment in that context, what they did. So basically they looked at this norm of not throwing rubbish on the floor, like I just did. And this is sort of the target norm. So ultimately, and this is sort of where this is pretty cool design, they kind of went out to the real world and observed how many people throw something at the floor. So I was actually thinking, and I don't know, maybe I didn't have the time this year, but maybe next year I'm going to do an experiment like this in this class, because you could totally do this. Here in the Arts Cafe, I don't know, you create a disorder condition and you see how many people violate another norm, how many people leave something behind or don't clean up their dishes or things like that. If you clearly signal to them that a contextual norm is broken. And then you do the same thing again, where the contextual norm is not broken, and then you look at how many people then clean up their dishes afterwards, right, in that context. So you can totally do fascinating research with this. But let me walk you through this experiment first, and maybe you guys have some ideas. So the target norm was not throwing something at the floor, not throwing rubbish on the floor, not littering. What was the contextual norm that they broke? It was graffiti. So those researchers put graffiti at the wall, while there was a sign next to the wall, no graffiti. So obviously the norm was then broken. But I'm going to come back to that in a second. So let's talk again about the target norm. So that's ultimately what they look at. How many people throw something on the floor? So what do they do? Well, we are in the Netherlands after all. So in the Netherlands there are lots of bikes. Lots of bicycles, and everybody is cycling around. It's just the thing that you do in the Netherlands. In Groningen is no different from any other Dutch city. So there are lots of bikes, and when you go into the streets, there are lots of bike racks, and everywhere everything is packed with bikes. So what they did, they went to a little street, it's called the Ting Tang Street in Groningen, and they attached crappy flyers to the bikes. And the crappy flyer, it looked like it was an advertisement from a sports company or from a sports shop and so on. And it basically just said, we wish you happy holidays. But it was just, what the hell, And they attached it to the bikes, to the saddle of the bikes, or to the front of the bikes. And then the researchers, they were basically hiding in the window upstairs in the second floor, and they observed who throws this flyer onto the floor. That's ultimately what they did. It's a pretty cool research design. And then, so this is sort of what they are observing at the end of the day. And this is sort of like, do people throw something on the floor? That's the target norm. Do people adhere to that norm that you shouldn't throw something onto the floor? How did they change the contextual norm? And when we talk about experiments, the way an experimental design works is you give one group a blue pill, another group a red pill, and at the end, if you randomly assign people to it, the only difference is that the one group got a pill while the other group got a placebo. Yeah? So that's sort of, then you can say, okay, the difference must be due to whatever I did. So what did they do over here? We call that also the treatment. Yeah? So you administer a treatment or you manipulate the treatment group while you don't manipulate the control or the random group. So they had an order and a disorder condition. So the order condition, and this is sort of now you see on the left-hand side how it looked like. You know, this is sort of this Tingtang Street in the Netherlands, in Groningen. There was a sign. And actually, first of all, let's check out the bikes. There you see the flyers attached to the bikes. Yeah. And there was a clear sign, no graffiti. And there was no graffiti at the wall. That's the order condition. Okay, then the next day, what they did, through public research funds, they actually had the approval and everything and so on. They went out in the night and they put some crappy graffiti at the wall. That's what the researchers did overnight. And then the next day, they went, okay, this is now the disorder condition. You see how this works? Because now there's a sign, no graffiti, but obviously there's graffiti next to it. So somebody must have broken that norm. You come along and you see, well, there's no graffiti sign, but obviously there's graffiti next to it. Nobody seems to be caring about norms here. Yeah. And this is now the experimental design. Yeah, you have like flyers are being attached to the bikes, and then you have your treatment and your control group. Yeah, in this case, it was like one day and then the next day. And in the order condition, there was no graffiti at the wall, while in the disorder condition, there was graffiti at the wall. And they did this at the same time of the day, at the same day of the week. So basically, there was no reason to believe why, in the one case, there should be another set of people walking along and having their bikes there and having to throw or to not throw down those flyers that were attached to those bikes. The only thing that is different in here is that in the one case there was graffiti at the wall. So basically this contextual norm was being broken, while in the other case it was not. And then in both cases, they kind of counted how many people throw this flyer onto the floor, and then you see the difference. Yeah? So that's sort of the design. That's the research design of this. And being a good researcher, I was there in Groningen not too long ago. I told you, actually I went to the Tingtang Street. So this is me reenacting this experiment. Actually, this happens when you go with a bunch of sociologists, you're drunk in the night and you're in Groningen and you're huge geeks. And then you read the science paper and then you say, let's reenact the science paper. Yeah? So basically, this is the Tingtang Street and they still have the graffiti on it, but it's sort of just from a slightly different view, from the different angle. Yeah? But it's exactly the place where they did this research. Okay, so what are the results? Well, the results are stunning. So in the case where there was no graffiti at the wall, 33% of the people threw down the flyer onto the floor. They littered. While when there was the graffiti at the wall, 69% of the people littered the flyer. It's a huge difference. It's a huge difference, and the only thing that is different is that in the one case, the contextual norm, no graffiti, is being followed, while in the other case, the contextual norm, no graffiti, is violated because there is graffiti at the wall. Everything else is the same. That's sort of like this kind of thinking. Of course, you could always argue, that's sort of why experiments are so beautiful in so many ways, because lots of other things matter. Obviously, lots of other things matter, but they should matter equally for the treatment and for the control group. That's sort of like the thing. That's sort of like where, as a researcher, this is a good design, because all the things that you don't even know about that they matter. They matter equally. So you can control for something that you don't know. That's sort of what this kind of design allows you to do. You can control for the unobserved. Actually, we call this unobserved heterogeneity. And here it's being taken care of through the experimental design. So, but the finding, 33% compared to 69% of the people who littered when there was graffiti. It's pretty stunning. Okay. And along these lines, they had 6 different experiments. So I'm going to talk about 3 other ones, but the idea is exactly the same in these other experiments. So the second experiment that they did was again about bikes. There are so many bikes in the Netherlands. And it was about a parking lot. So basically this was the setting. There was a parking lot and there was a fence around this parking lot. Actually, they set up this fence, deliberately. And they set it up in such a way that in order to get to the cars and to the parking lot, you had to walk quite a detour around the fence to get to the parking lot. And then, but then they also, what they did, they sort of put a little crack into this fence. Yeah? So like as if somebody had opened the fence to sneak through. And there was a sign, geen Durchgang, if you understand a little bit of Dutch, it means like no trespassing, no way, you shouldn't walk through here. That's the target norm. So ultimately, they kind of look at how many people walk through this hole in the fence to get to their cars. Yeah? And the idea to have this detour was that there is a clear incentive to do it. Actually, you would be better off if you would be doing it, yeah? Because you have a shorter amount of time that you need to walk around. But that was sort of the target norm. And at the end, they look at how many people walk through this hole in the fence. What was the contextual norm here? Like there's sort of like this other thing that is being violated, and then maybe something else gets violated. So the contextual norm here was displayed by this. Geen fietsen aan het hek vastmaken. Yeah. My Dutch sucks, but basically what it means, don't lock your bike to the fence. You're not allowed to lock your bike to this fence. So we had trespassing being the target norm. Like earlier case, it was how many people throw the flyer to the floor. Here it was how many people walk through the hole in the fence. And the contextual norm was not locking your bike to this fence. Yeah. So what they did now, again, they had like an order and a disorder condition. In the order condition, they had bikes, but they were sort of attached to a bike rack that was 2 meters away from this hole in the fence. Yeah? So it was like they followed the norm. You're not allowed to lock your bike to the fence, but lock it somewhere else. While in the disorder condition, they had the bike locked directly to the fence, just underneath the sign that said, don't lock your bike to this fence. Yeah? So again, the idea is like a contextual norm is being broken. Does that make people more likely to break another norm? So here now you see, this is sort of, again, a similar experimental design. We had the order condition, in this case, 4 bikes stand 1 meter away from the fence and are locked. And the disorder conditions, the same 4 bikes locked to the fence despite the sign that it is prohibited. And in both cases, again, there's no reason they did it at comparable times of the day. There was no reason to believe that in the one setting more people should walk through the fence than in the other one, or that there's a different kinds of people. The idea is that through random assignment, people are sort of randomly in the control and randomly in the treatment group. And in this case, it is a field experiment, so it's less controlled as in a laboratory environment, but still, there's no real reason to believe why the people walking by while the bikes are at the fence should be more likely to violate a norm than others. Yeah? Except, and that's sort of now again the treatment, that we have this contextual norm being violated. So there's lots of other things that matter, but they should matter equally for the treatment and for the control group. Okay, what were the results? Well, the results were equally stunning. So only 27% of the people who wanted to pick up their car violated the no trespassing ordinance when the bikes were not locked to the fence. So that was the order condition. There was a sign, no bikes to the fence. There were no bikes to the fence. There was also a sign, no trespassing. There was a hole in the fence. People didn't walk through. They followed the norms. While in the other case, in the disorder condition, when there was a bike locked to the fence, 82% of the people stepped through the gap to walk to the parking lot. Now you see how people, once kind of the contextual norm was being broken, they violated the target norm as well. And again, these results are just, it's just significant. There's a huge difference. There's more than twice as many people violate the norm just because something tiny like, these bikes were locked. That has actually nothing to do with people walking through this hole or not. It's just others seem to be breaking the norms here, so why should I the fuck care about the norms? Okay, third experiment, shopping carts. So here the setup was a bit like in the first one. So basically they went to a big shopping center and they attached flyers to the windshield of the cars. And again, they counted how many people throw away this flyer. Maybe you had this situation before, when you're driving around, you go back to the parking lot at UCD and somebody just littered the windshields with flyers. And, guy, what am I going to do? You have to take it off. You can't really leave it there and drive home with that piece of paper in front of your windshield. You have to take it off. But now the question is, do you throw it into a rubbish bin or do you just throw it into the floor? So in this case, so this is actually the setup. It was like this parking lot in the shopping center. And so the target was, again, throwing things on the floor. What was the breaking of the contextual norm here? It's quite innovative. You see those shopping carts standing around here. So there was a norm saying, please return the shopping carts to this station where you can pick them up. So in their order condition, the shopping carts were all returned to this pickup station, while in the disorder condition, they were sort of standing around wildly in the parking lot. Like somebody unloaded their shoppings, but they couldn't be bothered to return it back, and they just drove home and left the shopping cart standing there. That was the disorder condition. And similar setup, like flyers attached, and then you have the order condition and the disorder condition, and you count, or they counted how many people throw down the flyers on the floor. And what was the result? It was equally stunning, again in line with what we would have thought about so far. When the shopping carts were returned to the station, only 30% of the people threw away this piece of paper that was attached to their windshield to the floor. While when shopping carts were standing around wildly on that parking lot, almost twice as many people threw down that flyer on the floor. So again, it's sort of very much in line with our thinking so far, that when you have a contextual norm being broken, that then a target norm is being broken as well. Funny side story, you don't read that in the papers, but when they kind of did this experiment, they had the problem that people would actually clean up the mess all the time. So they had this disorder condition, and people, there were just some really nice people that sort of cleaned up all those shopping carts and picked them all up and returned them to the station. But that sort of messed up the disorder condition, right? So then they had to go out again and kind of again create the mess with the shopping carts standing around. So the way they actually came around that, they put some Vaseline on those shopping carts. Something very sticky, or some oil or something like that. So it was very sticky. So the people who kind of tried to clean up the mess kind of felt like, oh, this is disgusting, and then they actually left, because otherwise people would have destroyed the disorder condition all the time. Okay, let me talk about the last experiment that I brought with me in that context. It's about mailboxes and it's about money in envelopes. Also, very interesting experiment. So what they did here, you see it here. They had envelopes with money in it and like a window shield in it. So actually, you could look through and you could see that there's money in it. And they kind of put it into mailbox, and you see in a second how it looked like in mailbox of big apartment complexes that were reachable to everybody. So everybody could walk by. And now the question was, how many people steal these envelopes? I think at the end it was fake money in it. And another side story that you don't really read about that is that they had quite some difficulties producing those fake monies because it was illegal to counterfeit money. So they sort of had to find a way of producing, money that looked sort of real for the research purposes in a way, but not kind of break the laws by producing false money to begin with. So the target norm was how many people steal those envelopes. Now, what were the disorder conditions? Now, the disorder conditions were, actually, they had two versions of it. And the first one, let's talk about that. They're basically next to those publicly accessible mailboxes, they put some rubbish. They put some rubbish bins. And the idea here is, well, there's rubbish lying around. People don't seem to care about this. There's a norm being broken that you shouldn't put rubbish here on the streets or in front of the house. Nobody cares if I steal the money. While in the order condition, there was no rubbish next to the bins. And then they had even a more pronounced version of it, where they not only had rubbish next to the bins, to those mailboxes, but on the top of that, graffiti as well. So they really kind of pushed it, to kind of see, okay, now let's really give people the impression that nobody gives a fuck about this place. So and let's see if that kind of makes them more likely to then break another norm, which is not stealing those envelopes. So here you see the experimental design. Again, it's like a similar way, and at the end they just, how cool is that? The dependent variable is counting how many people steal those envelopes. And these are the kind of stuff you could totally do here at UCD, like little experiments, like how many people clean up their tables or how many people leave something behind or whatnot. What were the results? Well, again, it was equally stunning. So in the disorder conditions, twice as many people stole the envelope than in the order condition. When there was no graffiti at the wall, when there was no rubbish next to the mailboxes, people were less likely to steal those mailboxes. So when there was littering and graffiti around the mailboxes, more people stole the envelope. So these are sort of the experiments by Kaiser and others. Read up the paper. It's a fascinating read anyway. It's very straightforward as well. I brought some more stuff with me about the macro implications of crime, but I'm running a bit out of time, so I might talk about that next time or in another lecture. But for Friday, we have this reading, which is also very easy to read, but also very fascinating, why your friends have more friends than you do. So if you ever were interested in that, there's a scientific reason for it. Okay, see you on Friday.